Good morning. Hi, Emily. Good to see you. Let's
Good
see,
morning.
how many do we have so far? Okay, we'll give it maybe just another minute. People are still coming in. Hi, Laura. Morning. All right. Well, I think I'll go ahead and kick us off just so we make sure we stay on time. Welcome everyone to UD for You. My name is Lauren Schomburg. I'm the program manager for KC Communities for All Ages. Sorry, 1 second. Trying to get the screen right here. There we go. Okay, so our workshop today is going to explore strategies for local governments to incentivize universal design in multifamily development. Just to provide some context, Communities for All Ages is supporting consultation work between the RL Mace Universal Design Institute and the City of Roland Park as they work with the developer who is incorporating universal design principles into a new multifamily unit. Before we jump in, just a few housekeeping items. We ask that everybody remain on mute until the discussion session at the end. We will try to address questions in the chat at the end of each presenter section. So if you want to pop those in there, we can try to answer them in the chat. If not, I'll jump in and ask our speakers kind of when there's a good pause. I think you probably saw that the session will be recorded and we will send it with copies of the slides and some additional resource links following the session. Our agenda today, first we'll do a quick overview of Communities for All Ages for anybody who's joined us that's not familiar with our program. We'll give a brief history of universal design in the Kansas City region. And then we'll hear from both of our speakers and wrap up with about 20 minutes of discussion. So Communities for All Ages is what we call an age-inclusive city initiative, interchangeable with age-friendly, that provides tools to help cities and other local governments recognize their role in supporting their older residents. We do that by providing education, technical assistance, and recognition to local governments that take steps to become more inclusive of residents of all ages, and in the process, more vibrant, healthy, and prosperous. So our education is provided through workshops like this. We typically hold about 3 per year. We also provide technical assistance for the recognition program to help cities kind of move through the process. And then we're also kind of here for questions related to age-friendly work. And then we do take on some special projects as well. And then lastly, that recognition program, we do provide recognition to cities at 3 different award levels based on the work that's accomplished. All right, so moving into kind of our program history with this subject, we have been engaged around universal design since about 2012. The First Suburbs Coalition published a home modification guide, and there were some elements of accessibility. We launched the Communities for All Ages program. Then it was named KC for Aging and Community, also in that same year. In 2013, we convened kind of an informal universal design stakeholder work group with interest in elevating universal design in the region. In 2016, I think that work formalized into a partnership with AARP, and we coordinated 2 universal design park charrettes with Blue Springs and Roland Park. And once my portion is over, I'm going to link some of this stuff in the chat so you all have access to it, and we'll send it after the session as well. In 2021, we had a workshop on remodeling for accessible homes that was around kind of a book that we published, and I will link that in the chat as well. 2022, we had kind of a discussion about universal design and affordability, and I'll talk a little bit about the MDHC that was part of that on the next slide. And then finally, the last couple of years, we have been funding one-on-one universal design consultation with Richard Duncan and some cities in the region, including Raymore, Westwood, Excelsior Springs, and Roland Park. So here are a few examples of universal design implementation in the Kansas City region. In 2010, the whole person renovated a historic building in Midtown, Kansas City, Missouri, utilizing principles of universal design. This project demonstrated that historic buildings can be renovated to be accessible for people with disabilities. The interior spaces are flexible, intuitive, efficient, and easy to navigate, regardless of body size, posture, or mobility. There's an automatic sliding entry door, hands-free, raised floor system to allow better air quality, quieter environment. Interior paint, floor colors, and patterns are suited for wayfinding, and elevators are oversized to accommodate multiple wheelchairs. The city of Raymore has a universally designed home built by Pinnacle Homes of Kansas City. Features that integrate comfort and security often do not cost extra, but add value to the residents and save money on home customization later. Some features that are in this house include 36-inch wide doors for wheelchair mobility, zero entry front door and shower, lever style handles, and rocker style electric switches, lowered oven and microwave, kitchen sink built separately from the island, so it can easily be lowered, backing in bathroom walls to allow for easy installation of grab bars. And the last example I'll share about, this was our 2022 workshop topic, but the Missouri Housing Development Commission requires universal design on new construction in affordable housing developments. That is included in their 2024 Design Construction Compliance Guidelines. Basically says for all new construction, single family duplex, multiplex, and senior housing must be designed utilizing the principles of universal design. And I will share those guidelines in the chat shortly as well. So that's all I have for today. Just a little context and background before we move into our speakers. I think Jennifer is up first. Jennifer Jones-Lacey is a seasoned local government professional with over 18 years of experience in administration, finance, budgeting, neighborhood services, planning and zoning, and economic development. In Roland Park, she played a pivotal role in crafting universal design incentive guidelines and leading the city to become a gold level community for all ages recognition city, but promoting accessibility, inclusion, and aging in place. And then we'll hear from Richard Duncan, Executive Director of the RL Mace Universal Design Institute. Richard has spent over 35 years in the field of architectural and product accessibility and universal design in residential, public, and transportation environments. He has extensive experience in the design, costs, materials, and products in residential and non-residential settings. His work includes the issues of affordable housing and home repair financing, and transportation accessibility, as well as community design for constituencies that include people with disabilities and other households. So I'm going to pull my screen down and invite Jennifer to share her slides. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Lauren. Okay. Can you see my screen? All right.
Yes.
Great. All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Jones-Lacey with the City of Roland Park, and you just heard my introduction, and of course, I know a lot of you, so it's good to see familiar faces and some new folks as well. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about universal design incentives that we implemented in Roland Park for residential development specifically. Little bit of background about Roland Park. Um, we were really an early adopter of the Communities for All Ages program. We actually got the bronze level recognition in 2015. It was something that was very important to our council. They wanted to ensure that people could age in place. And so we went through the whole process, and in 2019, we got our gold level recognition status for implementing universal design elements in our signature park, which is called our park. And so this park was undergoing a major renovation, and we've been able to put in place a bunch of accessibility features within the entirety of the park. After that, we further engaged Richard Duncan to help us with renovating City Hall. We wanted to specifically make the bathrooms more accessible. Our building is from the 1970s, and so there's a lot of narrow doorways and elements that were not very accessible or usable for somebody who has mobility issues. So we worked with him to try to make those improvements, and that is in place today. And as many of you know, Northeast Johnson County is pretty much built out, but it is in high demand. And there are a lot of teardowns and rebuilds, particularly on the east side of the state line in Kansas. But that has expanded westward. And so Roland Park has seen more of this over time. And this is actually an example here on Birch Street of a pretty standard home that you would see in Roland Park was torn down, and what was shown here in 2022, that is the current home that exists. And so this is actually owned by a developer, and he actually has done this in two other lots on his street. So this is just becoming more and more common. And as a result, we know that there are going to be, there are new homes that are cropping up in Roland Park, and there's also a lot of substantial renovations. And as such, our council wanted to incentivize builders to put in place a lot of these sort of low to no cost accessibility features. And that's where the Universal Design Ordinance comes in. So we adopted our ordinance in 2021, and this was done really to basically waive building permit fees for builders who would, in fact, waive those or who would put in place a lot of those accessibility features. And so we worked with Richard Duncan and Hannah, his colleague, to put in place these elements, because none of us in Roland Park are experts on accessibility, architecture, or any of those things. And so we thought it was really important to work with somebody who was, and of course that was Richard. And he helped us to develop those guidelines to implement. And so anybody can take advantage of these. Really, we were targeting single family homes because we haven't had we're so small, we don't have a lot of multifamily that can really be developed. So that was the original intent. And so this can be applied to any new single family home or any new residential property. It can be applied to substantial renovation. So if there's a modification of 60% or more of the building, they could take advantage of this to get a full waiver of their building permit fees. We do, in fact, have this available for multifamily developments. And of course, multifamily market continues to perform better than many markets in the country, with properties reporting occupancy rates in the mid to upper 90% rate in Johnson County. And knowing that a lot of people are more in a position to rent rather than purchase their home, we wanted to make sure that this is something that could be taken advantage of. And so with a multifamily development, at least 30% of the units need to be some combination of type A and universally designed or age friendly. So we'll go into a little bit more detail in terms of what that actually means in a minute. But the architect of record has to certify that the construction is compliant with these features in order to take advantage of the incentive. So in comes the Rocks development. And so this is a 285 unit Class A residential apartment complex that is being built. It's actually a mixed use development and it's being built in the north part of our city. This was a development that is got a small amount of retail. It also has structured parking, 5% of affordable units. It's going to be constructed to LEED Silver standards, and it also includes a 1% art component. We told them about this ordinance and this incentive during the discussions with EPC, the real estate development group. And they were interested enough that they thought they wanted to participate and work towards making sure that they met that 30% rate. And so for them, that is 86 units that would have to be either that type A or UD/H friendly. So for a fee waiver, if they were to be compliant, it's nearly 130,000. So for them, it was a significant enough amount that it was worth their effort. And with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Richard. He's going to go into the various types of units and a little bit more detail on what that means.
Thank you, Jennifer. Sure. So most multifamily will be comprised of the type A units, which are required in most jurisdictions in the country, which are more accessible type units. They'll have some number of fair housing units in them also, which is also called type B units, depending upon the type of project it is. And then they may have a whole number of standard type, non-type A or non-fair housing type units as well. In an elevator served building such as the Rocks, all the units will come under either the type A classification or the fair housing classification. So for this project, we're introducing an additional unit type, which is something that's you might think of as between the type A and the fair housing unit, more accessible than fair housing with not all the same kinds of accessibility features that the type A unit has. In other words, something that would be that would look good and work well for people for a long time, more amenable to older adults, particularly, but also, of course, because of the nature of universal design to everybody. So the type A unit here, as people may have familiarity with, is usually applied to 5-ish% of the total numbers of units. And it refers back to the IBC building code and the accessibility provisions within those. And as you see here, Roland Park is currently using the 2018 IBC version and maybe moving forward, but those units will still be in the Rocks. And we'll talk about the extent to it. This is kind of a midstream discussion about what's happening in that particular project, but they still have type A units. They may have somewhat more than the 5%. We'll see how that washes out. But those are in there now. They were, designed principally to accommodate people with serious mobility impairments, such as folks who use wheelchairs. It's not hugely accessible, but it is more accessible than a lot of the other units you might find out there. So let's go to the next one. Yeah, so this shows an extract from the plans that we've been provided by the developer of one of the several different type A types. The bathrooms, as you can see here, has more interior space than perhaps a number of other standard bathrooms might have. Type A requirements that we think don't go quite as far as we'd like to from a universal design perspective are the minimal blocking. We'll talk more about that later. Showers in these bathrooms are optional, not so with the universal design units. They do have requirements for lowered counter space, which is a challenge from a lot of people's perspective. And they're not quite as specific about the kinds of storage and the type of storage that we'd like to see to make units really more usable for, frankly, a lot of folks, but especially for older adults as well. But they have these features inside, and it's a long laundry list. We didn't focus on the Type A units in this project. Of course, we were looking at the other things, but these are in there. So you can go to the next one. So here we have age friendly, which makes people dance, we find. And what we've done is kind of taken some of the basic elements that might be found in a Type A unit and taken out some of the things which are more designed specifically for folks who use wheelchairs, and then added in some additional elements, which frankly are better for a lot of folks, but certainly for older adults. So in this particular project, there's about 10-ish% Type A units. That seems to be where we're headed, and about 20% of the UDH friendly units that are in there, and all the rest are the fair housing units. The ordinance that we're working on with Roland Park, it doesn't specify some of the details about what percentage of Type A versus universal design, but it's coming out to be about 30% of the total, as Jennifer said. And we think that it's going to result in a big improvement over what might have been built otherwise. So let's go to the next one. So again, not hugely different, happily, from the Type A units in terms of floor plan. There's extra space in kitchens and bathrooms, which are the two most cramped spaces of most dwellings of any kind. One thing we've required is that the microwave not occupy its standard space over the stove or the range, but in some more reachable space. And we look more closely at the kinds of storage, and we'll talk about that more later on. In showers, so really looking at requiring curbless showers. Bathing fixtures is a real challenging area for all housing. We think that the curbless showers are really the way to go if you want to have extended, safe living in dwellings. And we also, in these particular units, and I think the other universal units may be built in the future, does have this additional space within the bathroom to accommodate people with a variety of life circumstances. So let's go to the next one and see where we're at with that. Yeah, so here's the fair housing units. They came into play nationally back in the early 90s, represented a huge upgrade from what was being built prior to that in the country, all multifamily, which is 4 units or more under one roof. The fair housing applies to. And as I've kind of indicated here, doesn't do such a good job within bathrooms and kitchens for a lot of folks. We'll talk about that more in detail. But actually, the impact of fair housing, in our opinion, is far better and far more profound in the overall project accessibility, the parking, the path of travel, the amenities, even in the model unit or the office. So this project will have all 3 kinds: Type A, universal design, as well as fair housing. Jennifer?
All right, I'm going to pick it up from here. So probably what a lot of you want to know is what is the developer's response? Is this something that they found easy to comply with? Is this something that they appreciated? And so I spoke with the architect and the developer to get some highlights and perhaps some lowlights and things that we want to work on. So one of the comments that they made is that they are simple changes to implement. We're talking about, moving the microwave and things like that, handles, door handles. Those are all very easy and accessible things for the developer to put in place. It is a meaningful value proposition, so the fee waiver was definitely substantial enough for them to want to take advantage of this. And considering most of it is essentially cost neutral to implement, then it made it even more enticing for them to want to take advantage of that. They also found it to be a bit of an educational endeavor. They weren't really sure what they were how they were going to comply and what this was going to look like to begin with. But they really learned a lot in the process and found they actually hired their own accessibility consultant in order to try to make sure that they were both compliant with our ordinance as well as trying to make sure that they were meeting all of the accessible requirements that they have to meet in general. And so they found it to be just very, enlightening for them. Of course, definitely some challenges. Primarily, it was vague criteria to start. I told them, admittedly, that this was the first opportunity that we've had to put this in place. And so we were kind of working through it with them as we went and recognizing at that time that, hey, maybe there's some things that could be simplified. Maybe there's some checklists that we could do. There's some amendments we can make, which we'll go into that in a little bit. They really were unsure in the beginning if they would be able to meet these regulations because they felt like it was so ambiguous from the outset, and they thought, yeah, I don't see how this is going to happen. That was their initial response. And they were pleasantly surprised that once they submitted the layout plans and we shared that with Richard and Hannah, that they were a lot closer to complying than they thought. And we did, again, really rely heavily on Richard and Hannah to help us determine if these units were in fact compliant with our ordinance. Because again, not being experts, we felt like we needed their support. And so that's one of the things that we're hoping with, a revised ordinance that we can maybe create a checklist or something so that it's a little bit easier for us to implement independently in the future. So, overall, really good response. They're very happy with how close they actually are. There were a few additional modifications that they need to make, but we're very close to getting to the point where they're going to get a full waiver of their building permit fees. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Richard, who's going to take a deeper dive into universal design and the universal design units and the features that you find at the Rocks.
Okay. So we'll do the pass off here. And we're good to go. Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. So that's the background in terms of the project in Roland Park. And we're so grateful for Mark for kind of bringing us in and helping us work with all these communities over the years with the work that we've been able to do. So we do a lot of work with AARP. You may not be surprised AARP has a vested interest in housing for older adults. So I steal their graphics occasionally. So this is their older adults in housing. And this is the demographic, of course, that's driving a whole lot of design changes in housing in particular around the country. Although, as I hope I share later on, it's not the reason for creating things universally. It's urgency to it because we've needed universal design for a long time. This is now the opportunity to do this. I could show you a number of charts. I love these graphics when it comes to demographics, but I controlled my impulse in this case because we have other things to talk about. But I'm just sharing this one here, which is pretty compelling, and it's like a lot of others you may have seen. The growth in the number of people over 65, which is the blue, and the number of people over 85, which is the green, beginning in 1900, very few people, and then ending in this case in 2060. And we're kind of midway, aren't we, on the right-hand side of that demographic curve, not by any means done with this growth. And if we extended it further, what we'd see is probably those lines leveling off. So they're not really going to be declining much over time if we don't mess things up. So we still have a lot of growth to go. And that's why we need to be spending particular attention to the housing environment for older adults, because not as much has been paid in the past. And now is the time. And so we're happy that Roland Park and Mark are helping us kind of move on that. So the goal for older adults is, and people have heard this phrase before, aging in place. That's what we want to be promoting. And all of us are aging in place. the ideal really is successful aging in place. How can we help older adults age more successfully? And we'd argue, of course, that most of us older adults live in homes that don't really help that much. We're about changing that dynamic in the Kansas City area. And also, people think of, and research tells us year after year and decade after decade, that older adults want to age in the place they're in now. What we know is, in spite of a lot of efforts, it may not be the best place for us to be aging. So aging in some place, hopefully in their communities, hopefully in places not far away from where they live now, where they prefer to be living, they can maintain their social context. So successful aging someplace is really the goal. And there's, a working definition of what aging in place is. Um, and this guy is really kind of my hero. He's an older guy hitting the gym hard. We know that lifestyle issues can have a big impact in successful aging and aging in place. But we know that even this guy is going to have problems at some point with his home and housing. So there's only so much we can do on our own. At some point, our homes have to come into play. And for too many of us, that's just not the case. So this is really, I'm throwing a bone to Kansas City, right? You've got snow, you had snow on the ground. I guarantee you a scenario like this has happened. And this presentation is not about outside features in homes, but I wanted to show this. Slippery set of stairs, no handrails. Got to have handrails on stairs to help people get up and down. So we hope that doesn't happen. Unfortunately, it probably is. We mentioned microwaves. They're always placed over the stoves and ovens. I've cleverly used a blue background here to indicate things we'd like not to see in housing for older adults. When you see this, that's your clue that you're looking at something that probably isn't a good idea. So yeah, moving the microwave away from over the stove. It's a very efficient place for a lot of folks. For a lot of others, not so good because it's up high. You're pulling hot things out of the microwave down on top of you. Not such a good thing. Storage is another issue. Lots of high storage, lots of low storage, and a lot of our housing that we live in now. And while you might think that with age comes wisdom, a lot of older adults do foolish and unwise things, including standing on things that may not be safe to get at this high storage with falls. And you've heard falls as being a huge issue nationally. And it is indeed in terms of money, in terms of impact. We even use unsafe stools when we're reaching things. So we pay attention to storage in universal design in kitchens. That's kind of a small, subtle thing that can make a big difference in a lot of people's lives. Other stuff we don't like so much is having to rely again on high storage everywhere. So we're about increasing the storage opportunities throughout the house that are more easy to reach for people. This is a very typical bathroom in lots of homes in the United States. Your bathroom may look like this as well. Three-fixture bath, lavatory on the right, toilet, bathtub, bathing fixture at the back with really narrow doorways. This is actually a 22-inch narrow doorway in clear opening width. What we'd like to see, 32 inches. So it's too many bathrooms are built like this, and remodeling that is a real pain and very expensive. And part of what we're doing with this, with universal design, is enhancing people's safety and independence, but also reducing their need to have expensive and very intrusive changes later on to accommodate them, unnecessary in many cases. So we want to avoid that. Here's the same kind of look bathroom, right, as I just showed you. And it shows you what it might look like if you were using a wheelchair. Okay, clearly totally inadequate. We'll come back to this image later on in a different context, but that's what we're trying to avoid, is people's thinking that they can use bathrooms like these, and it's very, very difficult. Even if you could, and you were very able-bodied in other respects, it shows you the difficulty of even getting and adjusting the mix valves. It's not just about using pieces of equipment. For all of us, squeezing between the toilet and the tub and reaching over to adjust the mix valve can be a problem. Our house has one of these bathrooms as well. It could be any of us leaning over. As we get older, our balance can be a problem. Our reach can be an issue. So we want to eliminate the need for these kinds of changes and these kinds of use patterns in bathrooms. So what happens with all of us living in these inadequately designed homes that may have worked for us for decades but don't anymore? We live these smaller lives, don't do as much within our home or outside the house because it may be difficult to get up, may have stairs like we just saw earlier. Our physical health can suffer as a result, with falls and with strains. Our mental health, surely, because we can't do the things we used to be able to do. That has impacts on us. We may be more socially isolated as a result of inadequate housing. And this can impact not just individuals, but family members, immediate family, extended family, as well as caregivers. Everybody's kind of put at risk with folks living in homes that don't work for them anymore. So we do think that it is a hair on fire emergency. It is urgent. We need to make changes, and it's past time. So this is going to happen in the Kansas City area. So we're happy to see more of that happening. So this is the general definition of universal design. We've adapted this over time, but it's really design of stuff that you don't have to manipulate a whole lot to make it work for people throughout a whole, lifespan. And that's what we think of when we're applying some of the features and design ideas that I'll be showing you over the course of the rest of this presentation. So first, let's talk about accessible design, because things began with accessible design. I'm not going to give you the history of this, but this began back in the 1950s and 60s. And the real beneficiaries of those kinds of design ideas long ago was a fairly narrowly framed bunch of folks who used wheelchairs, maybe people who are deaf, maybe you can throw in people who are blind. Indeed, folks like this who meet these categories needed lots of help, still do. Terrific benefits were made over the past 60 years from attending to different design standards for those kinds of folks. And I think we're all beneficiaries of that work over the past 60 years. Universal design takes a somewhat broader view. So in universal design, yeah, we're paying attention to those groups, but it's also folks who may use a whole variety of mobility equipment, or even maybe not mobility equipment, who may still have issues with mobility. It's not just people who are blind or deaf, if folks are inattentive, particularly in this environment. We have lots of electronics, lots of things to pay attention to. Inattention is a big deal. It's not just blind people, people with low vision, not just deaf people, people who have hard of hearing. Lots of older adults fall into these categories, as you can tell. Maybe a lot more of us as well, including folks with circumstantial disabilities. We'll show you examples of that coming up. And people with temporary disabilities. We all get injured at some point in our lives in various ways. We may have hospitalization, may have surgeries. We're all temporarily disabled for various reasons. And how about pregnant women late in pregnancy? Certainly, folks in that category operate differently than they did years ago, or they will in the future. So a much broader view of who benefits from these kind of environmental changes. So it could be family members that benefit from these kinds of things, families with strollers, families with bikes, families who can take advantage and really appreciate step-free entrances and more room inside homes than might otherwise be the case. And yeah, it could be an older adult who uses a walker, for example. They take up space too. Those tiny bathrooms that we use now that you saw in the images don't work well for them. Here's our folks with a temporary disability. This is maybe a weekend warrior, went out there and was skiing down the slopes of Kansas City or something and fell. And also maybe it's folks who do use wheelchairs and their families. Those folks can also benefit. So it's a broader beneficiary group, which we think should convey the fact that it has more impact than might be otherwise thought of in the old concept. And here's somebody with a circumstantial disability. It could be you or I walking into an office with a bag in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, or it could be someone who's a mover. Movers love universal housing of all kinds because they don't have to climb stairs. So it's about people in certain circumstances across their lives with a variety of situations. So for older adults, and maybe for a lot of folks, the community housing options that you're looking at, we can categorize in a number of different ways. Most of us want to do option one, and maybe not even the renovate part. We all say we want to remain in the homes we're in now. And for most of us, we can't really do that safely unless we renovate. So remaining and renovating is the option. That's okay for some folks. I would argue not for all of us. We love notions of house sharing. This gets beyond home design, but I just read an article the other day when it talks about the numbers of empty bedrooms in homes has gone up in the past few years. So we have lots of home capacity. We'd love to see more of that happening. Then there's the age-targeted, age-restricted housing category. This is an area, I got the asterisk there, which is done a slightly better job over the years at attending to design needs of the older adults that are the targets of this, usually in a mild to moderate way, usually not a big deal, not as far as we're talking about with the features in Roland Park, but nevertheless better. So for some folks, that's an option. This whole area, single family, duplex, triplex, very little has been done. We know that in our work with Roland Park, we're gonna be addressing that whole housing sector as well, trying to incentivize people to move in the direction of creating better housing for older adults in that zone. Even manufactured housing, which is kind of a no-no for a lot of folks, you can get in some places more accessibly designed units. We've actually worked with housing manufacturers in that area. So that's doing a better job. That's the asterisk there. We love the notion of people in whatever kinds of housing they're living in cluster pocket neighborhoods. That gets into the kind of community aging in place phenomenon, walkable communities. These kinds of housing typologies and development typologies work well for that. We're big in ADUs as well. We know that that adds some gentle density to communities and lots of other benefits we'll talk about in a separate area. Those really should be designed in a way that's age friendly as well so that people can live in them for a lifelong. Then here we are, multifamily. For some folks, whether it's rental or even owned, if you're designing, of course, you have more options. If you're a resident and you own your multifamily unit, this is the topic that we're talking about today. We think it's a decent option for a lot of folks for whom these other options don't work. And I think as a result of the work we're doing in Roland Park, people in the Kansas City area will have a better opportunity to age in place successfully. So here's our bathroom we saw from earlier, right? This is this small standard bathroom. It happens to be a fair housing qualifying bathroom as well in almost every respect, which is why we're focusing on units different from fair housing with the Rocks project in Roland Park. We know that this doesn't work for older adults and a lot of people throughout their lifespans and really isn't something that we can support. So kitchens and bathrooms in the fair housing units, these type of units, are two big deficit areas in the internal unit design of those, which is why we're focusing on those areas in our universal age-friendly design units. So here's my blue background again, right? Remember this, right? Stuff we don't like to see. Not that many folks would appreciate this kind of McDonald's restroom style grab bars and the proliferation of arbitrarily located grab bars in bathrooms in tub areas. For some folks, this may be fine. In general, generic grab bar placements are just that, hit or miss. Is it going to help me? Is it not going to help me? In general, all of us need grab bars at very specific locations, not generic locations, which is why we're not saying put grab bars in bathrooms of age-friendly units at first occupancy. Just going to be guessing. And again, you don't want to kind of fall back to the McDonald's restroom. Not that we appreciate those in McDonald's restrooms, just not in my bathroom, right? So we don't need to have all this iron in there. The bath seat's actually interesting. I love tubs that include options like this. Not a bad idea. Just avoid this. So I do like one thing in this tub, and that's the offset controls. You move these back towards the outside of the tub, and it means that I'm not bending over so far when I have to lean in and adjust the water temperature. So we do like those. People associate accessible design, as they should, with knee space, permanently open knee space in bathrooms and in kitchens and so on. Something that, again, not that useful for most older adults throughout most of even their older adult lives. And certainly from a marketing perspective, from a developer's perspective, if sinks and these spaces like this proliferated in all the units, as older adults, even though we should be knowing where we're headed, this is not going to be something that we're going to be gravitating towards. So we're not requiring that in our projects with these age-friendly units. You could design it so that that base cabinet was able to be pulled away, and that's an option. Not a bad option. It's really the only option that you might have in a bathroom. You couldn't do this in kitchens for reasons I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. But you could have designed that so you had the finished floor, the finished back, cabinets underneath while you use that cabinet space. You could pull away and have this left. Still not that attractive. You could do a better job of that. And that's one reason why it's a challenge. This is much better. It has a much more finished look to it. Unfortunately, this Kohler sink is no longer available, but you could do something like this that has an accessibility feature that kind of looks nice. Again, we're not focusing on this because that's something that you'd have to think that people would be gravitating towards that from a marketing perspective. We know that it's not, which is why I still have the blue background. Here, maybe a little bit better. This is another adjustable sink with fold back doors. So you could build this to begin with, have that finished interior. It's an option for us. It's even an option in type A bathrooms. And we're not opposed to this. It really is only workable in bathrooms that have the lowered counter to begin with. I know it's the fashion these days to have 36-inch high counters in bathrooms. That's not that useful for someone using a wheelchair because the counter then comes up to about here on a lot of folks, just too high for a lot of it to work well. So if you have a lowered counter, you could do this and it wouldn't be a bad idea. We like curbless showers. We promote curbless showers. We include curbless showers. There are happily lots and lots of curbless shower styles and types available from lots of manufacturers. You can't have a big curb. It's got to be a very low threshold in these. And that's one of the tricks. It's not that useful if it's a 2-inch curb. You're stepping over it. And if you use a wheelchair or you've got any kind of mobility issue, like my dad did, stepping over a curb is just not good. We like shower benches, especially if you add them afterwards. You don't have to attach them to the wall, though you could. And this particular bathroom has a couple of grab bars, happens to match the finish of the bathroom, which is okay. They look to be a little arbitrary. I would, install these without grab bars and then have the family individual install grab bars where they needed them later. Or you could go a little bit more higher end with tile. In this particular case, the individuals located grab bars exactly where they needed them in the style that they liked. They did have a wall hung little shower seat in this, I think it's a 4x4 type bathroom, so that they could fold it out of the way and fold it down when they needed it. So those are options as well as the handheld shower. I think all bathrooms should have handheld showers. Washing the dog, washing the kids, washing yourself works well. All right, so it's a blue background, which means don't like it. So this is the McDonald's grab bar location. So often what we see in lots and lots of housing units, it's arbitrary. It's not capricious, but it is at least arbitrary. And we don't need to put those in. You put them in where people need them when they need them. Plus the grab bar style, right? It's just looks like a McDonald's bathroom. You don't want that. It's part of what pulls people away from more useful designs is they have this stuff in their mind and they see it too often. It just doesn't look good. So we're about things looking good and working well. So this is a very interesting project someone did where they were really doing a great job of showing what not to do with grab bars blocking behind walls, even though they weren't intending to do that. This is a case where they're showing this very narrow blocking behind a wall. They took a lot of time to cut away that wall so you could see behind, which is terrific. If we all needed our grab bars and in that narrow frame, it'd be great. Very few of us do, which is why we don't recommend anything like that narrow blocking in any bathrooms. This is what we're really looking for, some kind of plywood sheet type product that goes behind the finished wall. So you can locate grab bars wherever you want to, wherever you need to. You don't have to worry about hitting a stud or not. That's the way to go. Again, blue background, right? We've got, a great kitchen, it looks like, for someone who may be seated, and it may be someone who uses the kitchen a lot. Lots of knee space that's open there. Does a terrific job for this individual. And if you had to convert a kitchen, it's a pretty daunting task is to make it work for that. Very difficult to make that transition. And so with universal design, even though we know some folks may wind up using devices from a seated position in the future, we don't think this is a marketable option in the marketplace. So those are just some things, some do's and don'ts in that context. We've come up with, this is, again, work in progress, both with Roland Park as well as this developer with multifamily. This is our midstream universal design criteria for multifamily housing units. And I'll just show you a couple of brief clips to show some of the things that we're highlighting in this kind of design. So we talk about primary entrance being on an accessible route of travel, not new territory here, zero step entries, meaning really no step up from outside walkway into the house, and no great progress here, just standard stuff for accessible design. 32-inch net clear with door openings. A lot of folks say you got to have 36-inch wide doors. We're thinking that that's better, but probably less feasible from a development and construction perspective. The 32-inch does a good job, and so on. Lever handles, nothing new. Entry door side lights, accessible peepholes, smart doorbell cameras. That's important, particularly for older adults where security is an issue and more of a concern for folks being able to see who's at the door and who's outside the door before you open the door. Again, we're working on this now, seeing if this is viable. Something that is less crucial, so we have a little plus there. That's not the most important thing. But interesting is, storm and screen doors. You can't use them on the primary entry door. We don't want to have people, and this is probably relevant to Kansas City, wrestling with the storm door and the prime door as they come in and out. You know what that's like. I do too. I have one in my house. It's a pain now. It's a pain. It'll be a pain later. We want to see if we can avoid that going forward. And then in terms of the interiors of the units, we also have to be mindful that we need to have a path to travel inside there. In kitchens, much longer list than this. And again, we're still working on this, but we're looking to provide a little bit more interior maneuvering space than they provide for in fair housing, as well as the opportunity, which is contained in other kind of standards, for increased space, in particular kitchen design styles. In these metrics that we're coming up with here, some of them are prescriptive, like the standard code language, 42 inches minimum between cabinet faces, 60-inch minimum turning diameters in some circumstances. In other cases, they're more performance-based. So I have an asterisk down there, wall oven at a comfortable height. We might get more specific with that. We do have some suggestions in terms of 54 inches and then 48 inches high for the highest rack within them. But so we'll vary in our criteria between making suggestions that are more kind of guideline based versus making suggestions that are more specific and quantitatively based, numerical and dimensional, and so on. So we talk about controls on stoves being in the front, clear floor space, again, not new language, borrowed language from other accessibility standards, which still has some validity and impact in a universal design context, making sure there's space around the things you need to be working on within kitchens. And then even talking more specifically about things like wall ovens, if you're fortunate enough to have them so you don't have to bend down underneath your stovetop, not always possible, how we need to have those positioned and think in terms of. Those are just a few of the examples of where we're going with the actual metrics that'll stand behind the ordinance that Roland Park is working on and that we'll be working with the ROCS developer. So let me just do a little shifting here. So this is Jennifer's slide from before, just to remind us, what the Type A units looked like. Shower optional, minimal blocking, having lowered counters, which are great for seated people, but not lots of others, and not as much storage definition. Let's see if I can get this to do that. And then in the age-friendly unit, having more storage, alternate microwave locations, more space inside the bathroom, showers mandatory in this case, and a few other unit plans that we saw from the ROCs that were just highlighting a few things. So if you look at this, the bathroom we're looking at is on the left-hand side of the image. The kitchen that we're looking at is in the middle. And it has maneuvering room we'd like, a little bit tighter. We think in this particular unit, in terms of the space between the counters in the kitchen, we'll see how that comes out. They've got pantry style storage, which is great, as I showed you before, I think. Has a curbless shower in there, which is also great. Um, and Great that it has next to the front door on the inside, you'll see down there, if I can get this moved, I can then actually show you. It has a bench down there, which is really nice for folks, particularly older adults, but everybody else have some place to sit, take shoes on and off, get yourself ready, put packages down. Nice thing to do. One thing that we would have liked, is in many cases, even with larger bathrooms, the in-swinging door is problematic. And with some bathrooms, especially in renovations, but even just in tight spaces, the out-swinging door can make a big difference, or a pocket door to take that maneuvering room constraints away. And so considering those kinds of things is something we'll be recommending going forward. And this is some elevation plans. If you're not used to looking at these, that's fine. But this shows the kitchen elevation of one of these very small kitchens. So it has the microwave over here, the stove with front controls. Doesn't have a whole lot of opportunity in here because there's not that much base cabinet for drawer bases, but we like drawer bases. There's one over here on this side, but it also has this, pantry style storage over here, which gives you all this flexibility of heights, higher, lower, and you can change it over time. Yeah, here's one very basic style of pantry storage. It all obviously is available in a whole lot of price points, right? From this, which is lower, towards much more expensive versions that are even more useful. But the idea with this stuff is, unlike base cabinets with doors, is that the storage comes to you. So you have both visual and physical access to it at different heights. This is actually pulling in. Look at those graphics, Jennifer. You think you're just the only one here. Well, you missed it. I'll show you the next one. So here's the stove with the front controls on it. Not crazy about some of the ways these things work out, but this is front control, so you don't have to reach over those burners. See, there you go. Or even something more innovative. We don't see this very often, but what this doesn't solve, this is kind of like on my wish list going forward, is the relationship between the knobs and the burner that it controls. It's a problem in my life. I don't know. I'm still looking at my little indicator on my stove at this point. But in this case, you've got no question about which knob controls which burner. We wish we could fix that problem in ways that are better that we've seen going forward. So in cases where in multifamily, where the washer dryer specified, front control, front loading is really, from an ergonomics perspective, way better. And you have all these options of mounting them vertically, higher, lower. Other options are there too. We know that space is often a constraint, and even in the full-sized versions, which this isn't terrific, right? It's a little bit high, but if space is a constraint, but you have the controls in the middle, and it has to be designed that way. I saw a poor, unfortunate person who had done a really good job on the rest of her apartment, probably brought her units in from her past home. And so you had the bottom unit, the washer with the controls here, the top unit, the dryer with the controls way up there. And she had, in the photo I didn't show it for this, is a stool down here. Exactly what we don't like to have people have to do, is to use a stool in a universal like that. So here's a nice looking kitchen. Again, this is from our friends at ARP, which shows the under counter lighting, which is so important. We include increased illumination in our criteria in kitchens, but also everywhere. And also a nice, do I have an arrow here? Yeah, I do. A nice lowered counter. We don't hate lowered counters. Lowered counters are fine. You just can't have the kitchen proliferating with them. And of course, lowered counters like this, as well as a lot of the other features we're talking about, is part of where kitchen design has been coming for years. We've really noticed this years ago. The kitchen design, with the options and flexibility and convenience, has been coming in the direction of universal design for a long time. So this stuff is hardly brand new in many cases. Just a question of making selections that are more appropriate for this wide age span that we're talking about here. So this is great for grandma sitting and helping, who can't stand as long, may not be seated, using a wheelchair, or for the kids doing their homework, or for mom or dad doing something. Lots of kitchens have these. We're saying let's make sure we include something like that if we can. And there are even various kinds of options. You could even mount a lowered counter at the end of a run of cabinets, and you could have some flexibility in what the height is of that. That gives you the knee space, but also the utility of that gives you flexibility. So there's other options that are possible. This also has, I think, yeah, it shows our under counter microwave, one location for these microwaves that we don't want to have over the stove. It's my last interesting photo, a slide, which is just an opportunity for me to talk about flooring. And this is actually not flooring that we'd probably prefer. It has a thicker pile and thicker padding underneath that we'd probably like. People associate that with luxury. Oh, very soft and so on. Not so great for older adults. We find that it doesn't prevent the hip fractures, but does promote tripping with toe drag that people may have. So having carpeting is okay. Having low pile, low padding, thickness carpeting is a better idea to maintain people's safety over time. We want to avoid the trips altogether, not so much be thinking about how you cushion the trips when they happen. So, okay, so we'll kind of summarize here and then we'll move off into the next section of this. But if we were to describe the kinds of units that we're talking about, they certainly have high function features. You've seen a lot of them here today. They, we think, are more livable than lots of other units with that high function capacity, but they're also highly marketable. They don't have all these kind of killing features that are highly identifiable as, oh, that's for grandma, or that's for someone who's older, or that's for someone who has a disability. That's a turnoff, we think, in the broader marketplace. It's going to work well and look good. And low cost customizations. Now, this is a challenge in a rental environment in general, right? We know that fair housing kind of changes the positioning of people who are doing this, but you're no longer looking at the expenses, the tens of thousands of dollars of expenses in enlarging a bathroom. It's the lower scale things like, adding grab bars in your bathroom. That's what we're looking at, is those kinds of small scale changes that can make a big difference in people's lives. Sure, it's great for older adults, but I think, as you've seen here, I don't think you can find anything we've talked about that we're promoting, at least, that isn't good for everybody. And that's the real benefit, because it can be marketed broadly, even as you emphasize for certain audiences the particular advantages of these. And this is what we think the developer should be doing. We'll probably working with them later on. So all universal housings or housing is also age friendly. So that's why we kind of use the UDAF. Although I think that's a challenging combination of letters and other contexts, which I can't talk about in the presentation. But yeah, all universal housing is age friendly as well. So we think this approach does reflect this kind of fundamental understanding that is so much more dominant and prevalent in our thinking these days, reflecting the understanding that variation in human form and performance is ordinary and expected. It's not unusual and different. So here's the kind of span of mankind images. So here's our resources. We have lots of them. You can go to our website. These are just a few of them. But I guess we can pause for questions or move on. But I'll duck out of this presentation, and we can figure out how we want to proceed next. We have questions, or we have polls.
I don't see any questions in the chat, so maybe we can go ahead and launch the poll and have some discussion about that.
So you click on those. Okay.
Yeah, because you're co-host, I don't think you'll be able to complete the poll.
Okay. So that's question one.
So they're 1 and 2 are together. Yeah. So Ashland, how do we show the results?
Once we end the poll, I can show results to everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you. We're learning.
So the first question is, are you currently contemplating or implementing this?
I think we can go ahead and publish it.
Can everyone see the results?
Well, on the little screen, I can. Oh, there we go.
Yes, thank you. So it looks like about 25% are currently implementing, 50% contemplating, 25% not planning to implement, and not contemplating. Do you have any? Go ahead, Jennifer.
I was just going to say, for those of you who are currently implementing, are you running into any challenges or having any questions with this process? Because now is a good time to ask. Richard's an expert, and he can kind of help walk you through some of those challenges you might be experiencing.
I guess I'll take the opportunity to mention here is that we're finishing up a book we're working on now on how to develop state level and local ordinances promoting universal design. So in the next few months, that'll be available to folks to have as a reference.
So I think it's very easy to do. Oh, okay. All right, Jan has a question. It looks like, in retrospect, what things would make a UD ordinance more user-friendly for both developers and staff? And so I can speak from a staff perspective, and then I'll let Richard speak a little bit more about from his perspective. But having a checklist, as I had mentioned earlier, I think would be very helpful. Okay, these are the things that you need in order to have a type A unit. These are optional things. So maybe you have like 5 things from this list, and then up to 3 things or 3 things at least on this other list. And then that therefore makes an age-friendly unit or a type A unit. And then having that, I think, is going to be a little bit more clear for both the developer and for staff when it comes to verifying if those things are actually met. And so that's really what we're trying to do moving forward, is we're hoping we can kind of modify our ordinance and make it so that it's a little bit simpler to implement.
Yeah, I think what you were alluding to, Jennifer, is the possibility of a tiered system with, you can have base level criteria, and then if you want to go farther and get more benefit, more incentive, you can add some other elements and features, and then you can go farther. So maybe a 3-layer tiered system is what we're thinking about for Roland Park. The things that we balance from a user-friendly perspective is how different and wacky, are the suggestions. And I've referenced a couple of times in my conversation that, we're borrowing some of the elements from the standard stuff that builders are used to seeing in terms of code language and usage, and then adding some others elements as well. But that's important. You try to make the list as short as possible as well, so that there's not an infinite list of things to be going through. So familiarity, as short as possible, clear criteria. Again, some is more prescriptive, some can be more guidance based, allowing some flexibility and latitude. So those are elements about it. I mean, we're mindful that if you're implementing this from a local municipality basis, it's your planning and permitting staff that's going to be the ones, meeting this. We know that training will be necessary in all likelihood to make this happen. You can't, like anything else, you can't just throw it out there and have it happen. But keeping it simple for them as well as for the people on the other end who are trying to follow this can make a difference. And before we go to the second, I guess well, anyway, we can go to the second question. I have some more things to say about um,
That was
this
just
whole
me.
area.
I was asking if anyone else on the call has actually successfully implemented a universal design incentive policy. If they
We've
would,
implemented a policy in Excelsior Springs, but I don't know that we'd call it successful because we really haven't had anyone take us up on it yet. We do have an MHDC project going in, and they're at the very beginning stages of their unit design. So we don't have a planner right now. That's our biggest hurdle is we don't have someone having those conversations with our developers. So if you have any planners looking for a job, send them over to Excelsior Springs. But that's an important piece is someone who's knowledgeable about this, who whenever developers or even a remodeler is coming along with a permit application that you can sit down with them and say, here's some things to consider that would make your space more livable for a longer period of time.
and how is your policy structured, Laura? Is it a waiver of fees, or how do you guys?
We copied yours.
Okay.
So it's the same one, but what we are wanting to do is make it a rebate on the back end instead of a waiver on the front end because we have trust issues.
Yes, I totally get that. That was one of the things we thought about after the fact.
Right.
But we haven't actually, they haven't paid their fee yet. So
yeah, and it wasn't a complete waiver of the entire permit fee either because there are elements of a building permit fee that are public works oriented that we can't waive their fees. We can waive fees in our office. So the electrical and the building, certain aspects of the permit could be waived, but not the entire permit fee. So there's a learning curve for the developer and for the staff.
sure. Yeah, in Roland Park, the all of the plan review fees, engineering fees, those are still in place, so they have to pay those. It's just strictly the building permit fee that is waived. So any sort of engineering review, they're still responsible for. So Justin asked a question. I can just jump in if that's okay, Lauren. Our council currently focused on sustainability and attainable housing, and that is what is tied to our incentive policies. We discussed Community for All Ages impacts on all council items, but nothing explicit on UD with incentives. Okay, so maybe this will spur some consideration there because I know Mission has a ton of development and a lot of multifamily, in fact. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well. So that was something that the council wanted to, perhaps incentivize on some level. For those considering UD related policies, what might Mark or the RL Mace Institute do to provide assistance or information to you?
That's to me.
To you and to Lauren.
I think
Well,
maybe
yeah.
Kathy's asking the audience, like, how can we support you in your efforts? Like, what would it take, kind of on a regional level to strengthen universal design implementation here? What do cities need from us?
And Mark has been very supportive with Roland Park because we have engaged Richard on so many things, and I know that a lot of we're getting grant funding through Mark in order to cover quite a bit of that, and that's been really helpful because Laura, to your point, not having a planner, and we don't have a planner either. I mean, we're such a small town that we don't necessarily have a lot of those individualized staffing elements, so we always have to contract them out. And so that's essentially what we've done. in order to implement this and to know what we're doing, we're like, well, we're going to let the experts come up with, the criteria and make the determination if this developer is in fact following suit. And this is the first time that anybody has taken advantage of this incentive. We've not had a single family residential builder implement it. That said, I do believe that we need to do a better job, probably educating our building inspector to communicate that to our single family builders, that this is open to them, this is an option for them, because part of it may just be a awareness of the fact that it even exists.
Well, and also I'll just add one of the dynamics is that in our thinking about this is that we hadn't thought that the fee waiver would necessarily be a one-to-one equivalence to the cost of implementation from the developer side. It would be you could think of it as an incentive, I think, in some cases. Let's say that Roland Park is only able to offer a partial incentive. That might be sufficient to induce some developers to get involved, knowing that on the back end, and again, Jennifer referred to this earlier, that they have increased marketing opportunities to either rent up faster or stay at a higher rental occupancy rate, have fewer turns, and so on. All those kinds of calculi that they have to include in their pro forma and their business model going forward. Those are advantages we think that are present in moving in the UDH friendly direction.
So Jan asked, is a model home or unit a good way to promote or educate builders and the public? Have other cities done this? So Raymore, that's the UD house in Raymore. I think that was kind of the intention of that project, was that it would be a home that they would allow for tours of before selling. I wasn't around during that time, so if Richard or Kathy, if you have additional insight into that, would be great to share.
Yeah, we love model homes as we call them demonstration homes, model homes that allow you to videotape it, take photographs, have people tour it. You get press coverage, so it's great for the builder and the developer, obviously in the short term, but it also attracts people. And there's nothing like walking through a home that has features and touching it and trying it out and seeing it compared to anything that we might be able to do here even. So we'd love to have that every year, have someone have it. Another way to raise awareness and to promote this is with a design competition. The Builders Association has their annual awards program, I'm sure, but you could do something Kansas City specific, maybe Mark could sponsor, where you invite architects or developers or builders or remodelers, depending upon the focus you want to have, to submit plans, and that generates a whole lot of interest and excitement around this.
There's a walkthrough video of the home in Raymore, and I don't know if it's still accessible, but we used that to show our team to kind of explain, okay, this is what universal design is, this is why we're talking about it, and this is what it looks like. Because as soon as you mention something that's more usable, or you say the word accessible, everybody's imagination immediately goes to the metal grab bars all over the house. And so that home was beautifully designed. It's a beautiful home. And the video labels, okay, here's the zero entryway. And so, yeah, it's very helpful.
I'll link that again. Sorry, I tried to link it, but I pasted the wrong thing. 1 second. Okay, questions. I have a question for you, Richard. Are there any model regions or other cities that you work with where you see this in action and it's working really well. Kind of any lessons learned from outside the region that we could apply here?
Well, I'll answer it this way. So we've actually done some national research on who's doing what where, and it's really hard to find, to find every place that's been doing something. There's no national registry of places like this, so it's really a difficult process of gathering information. A lot of places have tried incentive programs. A few have tried mandatory programs. And we find that incentive programs without teeth tend to have very little result. And so something like, Roland Park, which has something substantial, will attract attention. We find that mandatory programs, because they've been enacted on the local level, tend to have very little in the way of what they're asking people to do in the homes, and so that you're too many places are caught between this, and that they have an incentive with very terrific features. No one's gravitating that way because we haven't developed a sufficient cultural change and education and awareness to make it happen. If you're able to pass something mandatory with all the constituencies that are present in every community, it tends to be so watered down that you're not having the kind of effect that you might want to have otherwise. Even a place that has done this, I mean, there's several of them, but some in the Midwest, some in the Southwest, um, where they've actually gone far enough so they have step-free entrances into all houses built in the past 20 years. The people there admit, well, that's fine, but that's kind of where it ends. So you still have bedrooms on the second floor. This is single family detached housing, and bathrooms that don't really meet people's needs, and so on. So it's not really livable. So that's the dynamic. That's a challenge. So to answer your question, we can point to places that have done a good job at certain elements of this, but not any or many that really are checking all the boxes. You guys may be the national leaders in that respect in terms of making an attempt at different places around one metro area, trying to make this happen. So we'll check back with you in a year or 5 years, and we can really point to some great success.
Um, this is probably for Jennifer and Richard, but I'm curious. It sounds like the developer you're working with, Jennifer, was pretty open and like interested in like learning some new things. I'm just curious if that is a typical experience or an exceptional experience. And if it is sort of the exception, are there strategies that cities could use to sort of bring this information to their developers? With that first point of contact, what kind of resources exist? What are the talking points? What are the key selling points? How do you sell that value?
So I would say that if you're giving the developer basically money in their pocket, then they're interested. So, of course, that's always the number one rationale for a developer to do anything is they're trying to maximize their bottom line. And so this does this in a way that is not going to require them to take on a lot of additional expense. And they also recognize that they will get to market these units as more accessible, for people who need that in this current moment. So I think for them, it was a big plus, and there wasn't really a lot of downside, quite frankly, other than just not being entirely sure how it would shake out and what exactly all of the requirements meant from the outset. Again, I think this experience going through this with them has provided a lot more context for how we can make amendments and make the ordinance better. So I don't know if Richard has any other insights as to, maybe other developers or what,
Mhm.
what other hurdles may exist for them.
Yeah, I think that this did was a unique combination of factors. The kind of development it was, the fact that it was all elevator served buildings, so you had a very large number of potential impacts, and therefore kind of incentive opportunities there as well. Um, and with other developers who are building walk-up units or not quite as many, and maybe not elevator served buildings, it may be, less there to be able to grab onto. But this is what it takes. It takes one shining example of a success that people can then modify and build off of because they can do it. Well, then maybe you can do it in other places. So we think that that's what it's really needed is to showcase this now.
Yeah, I almost wonder like what is the strategy to get in front of the developers first so that they're hearing about this and knowing about it before they're even approaching the cities or the cities are
Mm.
approaching them. And I don't know. I don't know if they have like associations and networks, places to kind of share that information. If there's even like a regional or local network of developers that we could, just share general information about universal design so that they've heard it and understand it at a time.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think
Well,
working, with like if you have a marketing, for example, we owned the lot that the Rocks was on, so we were in the process of marketing the property, and so that's kind of a selling point, if the city or the community owns the real estate, that makes
mm.
it a lot easier to say that this is available, at least from each individual property's perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, the home builders has had a multi-unit, multifamily council, so that association um, would be a place to start.
Okay, great. So we're just about at time. Just wanted to thank everybody for joining us today. Some next steps. First, consider implementing or updating your Universal Design Ordinance. Could use Rowan Park as an example. I know Richard, Kathy had asked in the chat too, if you are available to consult with cities.
Sure.
Number two kind of hints at that. We've applied for some grant funding that could potentially cover some of that consultation cost. Again, this is funding dependent. We have to get that grant first. But I don't know if you're available kind of outside of that, if the city is able to put up the funds
Sure.
themselves. And then
Sure,
lastly,
sure.
and then I've just got here looking out for the book. Richard, if you just want to let me know when that's available, I'll make sure our network sees it and knows how to access it. And
Will
that's
do.
all today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and one other thing I'll just point out is that if we do, once we get a revised ordinance in place, we'll certainly share it with you, Lauren, and then you could share it to the
Yep.
network, and
Yep. That would be
that'll
cool.
be, even better than what we have currently. So you can get the latest and greatest.
Yeah. And I'll just build on that. We will someday have our online kind of checklist, digital checklist resource hub launched. We didn't quite get that done this year, but it's still in the works. And we hope to have that done in 2020. And that'll be a good place for kind of all those sample ordinances to live.
Hmm.
Okay.
thanks.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you
Thank you so
everyone.
all.
much.